Ever get that well-meaning advice, like love your enemies, and you just think, oh yeah, sure, how about you try it?
Right.
Well, that's what we're diving into today.
Okay. Sounds good.
We're going straight to the source, the Gospel of Matthew, where Jesus really lays down the gauntlet on this one.
Love your enemies, huh? Always a tough one.
It's one of those phrases, you hear it and you kind of think you get it, but there's a lot to unpack. To really get into it, we've got to hear the actual passage. This is Matthew chapter 5, starting at verse 43.
Go ahead.
You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. It's a lot. I mean, that first line alone, you've heard it said. It's almost like he knows we're going to struggle with this.
Yeah, it's not exactly breaking news that loving your enemies is hard, even back then.
Because loving your neighbor, that was already a thing, right?
Oh, yeah. That was old news. Jewish tradition, it was all about loving your neighbor, taking care of your own. But enemies, different story. Hating your enemies, that was pretty much expected. Sometimes even encouraged.
So to come out and say, love them, that's radical.
Completely. A total curveball.
And then he takes it even further. Pray for those who persecute you. I mean, come on. What do we do with that?
It's intense, right? I think it shows just how different this kind of love is. It's not just about being nice to someone who's mean to you. This is deeper. It's about actively fighting against that natural instinct, that desire for revenge, or even just to be bitter.
So it's about rising above, even when it's really, really hard.
And that's where it gets really interesting, because when you think about it, why would we even try to do that? It can't just be about being nice for the sake of it. There's got to be something more.
Okay, so what's the why here?
Well, a lot of people interpret this as a way of reflecting God's love. Think about it. God's love, it's supposed to be boundless, unconditional, right? It's not just for the good people, it's for everyone. So by even trying to love our enemies, we're sort of trying to be more like God.
It's about trying to tap into something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And that makes me think about those lines about the sun and the rain. He says the sun rises on the evil and the good, and the rain falls on the righteous and the unrighteous. It's like nature itself is showing us how it's done.
It's that impartial love.
Exactly. It's like you can't control the sun, right? It's going to shine on whoever's out there. And that's the kind of love we're supposed to strive for, a love that goes beyond our judgments and prejudices.
Which brings us to that last line, and this is a big one. Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. I mean, seriously, perfect.
Because who's actually reaching that level?
Exactly.
Well, the thing is, the word perfect here, it doesn't necessarily mean what we usually think of. It's not about being flawless without a single mistake.
Okay, so what does it mean then?
It's more about wholeness, being complete. It's that mature, all-encompassing love we were just talking about.
So less about being superhuman and more about reflecting the divine in our own way.
Exactly. And the thing is, even if we never actually achieve that perfect love, just the act of trying, of striving for it, that changes us.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've got the historical context, the radical nature of this teaching, the impact it can have. But let's be real for a second. What does this actually look like in everyday life? Because not every situation calls for, baking a cake for someone who wronged you.
Oh, absolutely not. And look, there are definitely situations where you need to set boundaries. Protecting yourself, that's important. Loving your enemies, it doesn't mean letting people walk all over you.
So where do we draw the line?
I think it's more about how can you hold on to your compassion, your empathy, even when it's hard, even when someone's pushing your buttons.
So maybe it's not reacting in anger when someone cuts you off in traffic, or finding a way to forgive a friend who's hurt you.
Exactly. Those might seem like small things, but they can make a difference. And you never know, that little act of love, it might just ripple outward.
That's a good point. It's about breaking those cycles of negativity.
Right.
Wow, this has really given me a lot to think about.
Me too. It's challenging stuff.
It is, but it's a good challenge. That's a good place to leave it for our listeners, too. Figuring out what loving your enemies means in your own life, that's the real work. And it's not always easy, but it's a journey worth taking.
It really is.